My mother stole my passport 11 hours before my flight to Italy. Interesting thing about betrayal. Sometimes it waits until your suitcase is already packed. At 3:45 that morning, I was supposed to wake up, grab my bags, and leave Ridgemont, Ohio forever. Instead, I sat in the dark staring at an empty nightstand where my passport used to be. No note. No explanation. Just absence. Interesting, honestly. Because the people who steal your future rarely consider it theft. My name is Sonia Corbin. 31 years old. Accountant by profession. Cook by inheritance. Unpaid family employee since childhood. And 3 weeks away from discovering my father had built an entire financial life using my identity. But that night, I only knew one thing. My mother did not intend to let me leave. The house smelled like bleach and overcooked roast beef. Same smell every Tuesday growing up. Same yellow kitchen light above the table. Same scratch in the wood from when I dropped a mixing bowl at 8 years old. And sitting beneath that light, my mother waited with both hands flat against the table like she was physically holding the family together. Dad stood behind her. Arms crossed. Silent. My sister Gwen scrolled her phone from the couch without looking up. Interesting thing about family conspiracies. Everybody rehearses their role beforehand. Sit down, Sonia, Mom said. I stayed standing. What's going on? No answer immediately. Just tension stretching across the room like wire pulled too tight. Then finally, you're not leaving. Interesting, honestly. Not. We're worried. Not. Can we talk? Just a decision already made without me. I laughed once. Actually laughed. Because surely this had to be temporary insanity. My flight leaves in 11 hours. Mom nodded slowly. Your passport is safe. Safe. Interesting word from someone committing theft emotionally. Dad finally spoke then. Your sister needs help with the kids. There it was. Not concern for me. Not fear. Utility. I looked toward Gwen. She finally glanced up from her phone. Lily cries when you leave for weekends. Interesting, honestly. Because emotionally manipulative families always weaponize children first. I stood there staring at 3 people who shared my blood and suddenly understood something devastating. They never believed my life belonged fully to me. Italy wasn't education to them. It was abandonment. Because who would cook? Who would clean? Who would close the restaurant Friday nights for free? Who would babysit? Who would absorb every inconvenience silently so nobody else had to? Interesting thing about reliable daughters. Families confuse consistency with ownership eventually. I went upstairs without another word. Didn't scream. Didn't argue. Just closed my bedroom door softly and sat on the edge of the bed beside 2 packed suitcases. Outside. March rain tapped lightly against the windows. My acceptance letter to the University of Bologna sat inside my carry-on folder. Tuition paid. Visa approved. 3 years of savings. $47,000 earned, 1 spreadsheet, 1 tax return, 1 exhausting 14-hour day at a time. And downstairs? My family had just decided none of it mattered more than their convenience. Interesting, honestly. Because people who depend on your sacrifice rarely survive your independence emotionally. I didn't sleep. At 6:14 a.m. My flight left Columbus without me. At 6:15. I opened my banking app to rebook another flight. Account restricted. Temporary hold placed by cosigner. Dad. Interesting thing about financial abuse. It becomes much easier once someone mistakes trust for permission. I stared at the screen while coffee brewed downstairs. $47,000 frozen. 3 years of work locked behind my father's authorization. And honestly, that was the moment something inside me stopped trying to preserve the relationship emotionally. Not anger. Clarity. Huge difference. The next 3 days passed like slow poison. Breakfast. Dinner. Restaurant shifts. Nobody mentioning Italy anymore. Mom cheerful again already. Because manipulative people mistake silence for surrender constantly. You'll realize staying is better eventually, she said Wednesday while folding napkins behind the restaurant counter. Interesting honestly. Because prison sounds reasonable when the jailer calls it family. Dad avoided eye contact completely. Not guilty. I know that now. Afraid. Afraid I might already know something. Thursday afternoon? Gwen tried kindness instead. There's always next year. Interesting phrase. Because people who destroy your future always speak like time belongs to you equally afterward. That night, I called Nathan Webb. College friend. Consumer fraud attorney. One of the only people in my life who spoke about problems like they were solvable instead of emotional. The call lasted 14 minutes. I explained the passport. The frozen account. The cosigner access. Then Nathan asked one question that changed everything permanently. Sonia. Pause. Have you checked your credit report recently? Interesting honestly. Because sometimes the worst betrayal enters your life disguised as a practical question. I opened my laptop after midnight. Blue screen light filling the bedroom. Rain still tapping softly against the glass. Annualcreditreport.com. Social security number. Verification questions. Then the report loaded. And suddenly, my stolen passport became the smallest crime in the house. 3 loans. $86,000 total. All under my name. All fraudulent. Home equity line. SBA microloan. Personal loan. Every signature forged. Every address tied back to Corbin's kitchen. Interesting thing about identity theft by family. Your first reaction isn't rage. It's confusion. Like your brain physically refuses to process that the people who taught you to write your name also weaponized it. Then I checked my credit score. 512. 2 years earlier. 780. Gone. Destroyed quietly while I balanced restaurant books for free every Sunday. Then came the taxes. 6 consecutive years claimed as dependent. Restaurant income underreported by tens of thousands. I sat there in the dark for 20 full minutes afterward. No tears. No panic. Just silence. Interesting honestly. Because once betrayal reaches a certain size, your nervous system stops reacting emotionally and starts documenting instead. I opened the Notes app on my phone. Typed 5 lines. Loans, $86,000. Forged. Tax fraud, 6 years. Credit score, 512. Saturday, Nathan. Then I plugged my phone into the charger. Set my alarm. And went to sleep in the same house as the people who had been stealing my identity for years. Nathan's office smelled like old coffee and printer toner. Interesting thing about lawyers. The good ones get quieter the worse your situation becomes. I drove 2 hours to Columbus that Saturday morning with my credit report sitting in the passenger seat like evidence from a crime scene. Rain followed me most of the way down Route 33. Gray Ohio sky. Wet farmland. Windshield wipers beating the same rhythm over and over like a countdown. Interesting honestly. Because by then, I already knew my parents stole from me financially. I just didn't know how far it went yet. Nathan Webb practiced consumer fraud law out of a 3rd-floor office above a pharmacy near the Short North. Small waiting room. Faded carpet. Law books stacked in uneven towers beside the desk. No fancy corporate energy. Just competence. That mattered. Nathan read every page without interrupting. Credit reports. Tax filings. Screenshots from the frozen bank account. And when he finally leaned back in his chair, his expression confirmed something before he even spoke. This is identity theft, Sonia. Interesting thing about hearing legal language attached to your family. It changes the emotional temperature instantly. Not betrayal anymore. Crime. He tapped the loan paperwork carefully. 3 separate forged applications. Pause. Federal offenses. Then the taxes. They claimed you as a dependent while you filed independently. Another pause. That's going to trigger audits. Plural. Audits. Interesting, honestly. Because suddenly the damage stretched far beyond one stolen passport. Nathan started building the recovery plan immediately. FTC identity theft report. Police report. Loan disputes. Credit freeze. IRS fraud filing. Emergency passport replacement. New bank account. New direct deposit. Every step precise. Systematic. Like rebuilding a collapsed structure one beam at a time. How much time do you need? He asked. I stared out his office window toward the parking lot below. Then answered without hesitation. 5 weeks. Nathan looked confused. The restaurant's 40th anniversary party is April 19th. Interesting thing about timing. People who ambush you emotionally rarely expect patience in return. I don't want revenge, I said quietly. Pause. I want witnesses. Nathan studied me for several seconds after that. Then nodded once. You're not destroying your family. Pause. You're documenting what they already destroyed. Interesting, honestly. Because that sentence gave me permission to stop feeling guilty for protecting myself. Week 1 started Monday morning. New checking account at a credit union 30 minutes outside Ridgemont. Far enough nobody at the local branch would mention it to Dad accidentally. I redirected my paycheck from Morris and Lyle. By Wednesday, my salary would finally land somewhere my father couldn't freeze. Tuesday night. FTC identity theft report. 40 minutes entering account numbers, dates, fraudulent balances. Every form field felt surgical. Painful. Necessary. Interesting thing about reclaiming your life. It's mostly paperwork before it becomes freedom. Wednesday. Nathan secured my emergency passport appointment. Thursday. I rebooked my flight. April 20th. One way. The morning after the restaurant anniversary party. Interesting, honestly. Because by then, I already knew I would never live in that house again. Still, I kept performing normal. That part exhausted me most. Dinner every night beside people who had secretly ruined my financial future. Closing shifts at Corbin's kitchen. Babysitting Lily and Max. Smiling politely while Mom acted relieved I had come to my senses. You're happier here, she said Sunday while refilling sweet tea pitchers. Interesting phrase. Because people benefiting from your imprisonment often mistake exhaustion for contentment. Then came Tuesday night. The moment I realized my family didn't just expect sacrifice anymore. They expected permanence. We sat around the dinner table eating pot roast while Gwen casually rearranged my future like she was discussing weather. Since Sonia's staying. Pause. Maybe she can take the kids Tuesdays and Thursdays too. Mom nodded immediately. Wonderful idea. Interesting, honestly. Because in my family, my consent had become optional years earlier. Gwen kept talking. You should move into the apartment above the restaurant. Dad still wouldn't look at me. Saves gas money. Then the sentence that finally snapped something inside me emotionally. You don't even have kids or a husband. What else are you doing with your time? Interesting thing about exploitation. Eventually people stop disguising it as appreciation. I set my fork down carefully. Counted silently to 3. Then stood up. I'll think about it. That's all I said. Upstairs in my bedroom. I opened my notes app. April 19th. 23 days remaining. Then I added one more line. Apartment lease forged too. Because earlier that afternoon, Nathan discovered the lease above Corbin's kitchen carried my forged signature as guarantor. Another debt. Another obligation attached to a life I never agreed to live. Interesting, honestly. Because while my family talked about me like permanent labor, they were literally building legal structures around trapping me financially. Saturday afternoon? The Baptist Women's Fellowship booked 12 tables at the restaurant. 53 customers. I worked the entire floor alone. Of course I did. Gwen texted sick at 9:14. By 10:37? Her Instagram story showed fresh coral pink nails at a salon on Route 9. Interesting thing about unreliable people. They always assume dependable people will absorb the damage silently. I served coffee. Reset tables. Ran food. Cleaned spills. Handled every customer myself while Mom stood behind the register issuing instructions like management counted as contribution. At 12:40, she grabbed a clean apron from the hook beside the kitchen and threw it directly at my chest. Move faster. Pause. This isn't vacation. The apron hit my shoulder and dropped onto the tile floor. 3 regulars watched it happen. Nobody spoke. Interesting, honestly. Because public humiliation works best when witnesses stay polite. I bent down. Picked up the apron. Put it on. And kept serving tables. But Martha Patterson caught my wrist near table 9 30 minutes later. 72 years old. Been eating at Corbin's kitchen since Reagan's first term. You okay, honey? Interesting thing about kindness. It becomes unforgettable once you've gone too long without it. I'm fine, Mrs. Patterson. She looked at me for a long moment. Didn't believe me. But squeezed my hand gently anyway. I closed the restaurant alone that night. Swept. Mopped. Locked the front door at 11:08. Mom and Dad already home by 9. And sitting beside the register. A stack of bright yellow flyers. Corbin's Kitchen, 40th Anniversary Celebration. April 19th. Whole town invited. I picked one up. Read it twice. Then smiled for the first time since my passport disappeared. Interesting, honestly. Because suddenly, I finally knew exactly when my family's version of the story would end publicly. The anniversary banner arrived 3 days early. Interesting thing about small-town celebrations. They become dangerous once secrets are invited too. 40 years of family, food and community stretched across the restaurant windows in giant gold letters. Mom cried when she saw it. Actual tears. Hand pressed dramatically against her chest while customers applauded from the booths. Interesting, honestly. Because people who destroy families privately usually work hardest protecting the image publicly. Dad hung framed photographs around the dining room all week. Black and white shots from the restaurant's opening in 1985. Old newspaper clippings. Community awards. Pictures of Gwen helping in the kitchen as a teenager. Pictures of Mom serving pie at county fairs. Pictures of Dad shaking hands with mayors. And almost none of me. Interesting thing about erasure. It rarely happens all at once. One missing photograph at a time. One cropped memory after another. I noticed immediately. Of course I did. There were hundreds of photos stored upstairs in boxes. Photos of me balancing homework beside cash registers at 12 years old. Closing the restaurant alone at 16. Handling payroll at 19. But downstairs, the official family history barely acknowledged I existed. Nathan called Thursday afternoon while I restocked syrup bottles behind the counter. Good news first, he said quietly. Pause. Your new passport arrives Monday. For the first time in weeks, I could finally breathe properly again. Italy still existed. My future still existed. Then came the second update. The SBA loan originated using your identity purchased the restaurant's second freezer system. Interesting, honestly. Because every new discovery made the betrayal feel less emotional and more architectural. Systematic. Intentional. Built over years. Nathan kept talking. The home equity line financed the kitchen remodel in 2021. Another pause. And Sonia. His voice changed slightly there. Careful now. We found something attached to the business taxes. Interesting thing about lawyers. You learn fear from the silence before the sentence. What? Nathan exhaled once. You've been listed as 50% owner of Corbin's Kitchen since 2018. I stopped moving entirely. The restaurant noise faded behind me instantly. Coffee machines. Dishes. Customers. Gone. Interesting, honestly. Because suddenly my family's control over me made horrifying sense financially. Half owner. Half liable. Half responsible for every debt and fraudulent filing tied to the restaurant. Without my knowledge. Without my signature. Without consent. Why would they do that? I whispered. Nathan answered immediately. Because if the business collapsed. Pause. Half the legal damage would belong to you. There it was. Not dependents. Not family obligation. Insurance. I wasn't their daughter emotionally anymore. I was financial protection. That realization settled into my chest colder than anger ever could. Saturday night. The restaurant overflowed with anniversary decorations. Fresh flowers. Balloon arches. Printed menus with 40 years of Corbin tradition embossed in gold script. The entire town planned to attend. Church leaders. Local council members. Former employees. Reporters from the Ridgemont Gazette. Interesting, honestly. Because my parents unknowingly built the perfect audience for accountability themselves. Mom stood beside the dessert display reviewing seating charts while Gwen scrolled Pinterest wedding ideas beside her. Still assuming my life belonged permanently inside theirs. You'll handle speeches before dinner, Mom said casually. Not asked. Assigned. Dad kept pretending normalcy too. That part fascinated me most honestly. Because guilty people often believe consistency can delay consequences indefinitely. Then Sunday happened. The final crack before everything exploded publicly. Maya Thompson walked into the restaurant at 8:12 a.m. Travel backpack. University hoodie. Florence luggage tag hanging from her carry-on. 26 years old. Former waitress at Corbin's Kitchen. Left Ohio 3 years earlier for culinary school in Italy. Interesting, honestly. Because sometimes the universe sends witnesses exactly when you need them emotionally. Mom stiffened immediately when she saw her. Dad almost dropped the coffee pot. Maya smiled anyway. Warm. Relaxed. Free. Sonia, she shouted across the restaurant. Then hugged me so tightly I nearly cried in front of the pancake station. You actually did it, she whispered. Pause. You got accepted. Interesting thing about escaped people. They recognized desperation in those still trapped instantly. Mom forced a smile from behind the counter. Maya's visiting from Italy. Visiting. Like she hadn't spent years warning me to leave before my family buried me emotionally too. Maya ordered espresso. Sat at booth 7. And waited until Mom disappeared into the supply room before speaking quietly. You still planning to go? I nodded once. Then told her everything. Passport. Loans. Frozen account. Identity theft. The forged ownership stake. Every single thing. Maya listened without interrupting. Interesting, honestly. Because survivors don't need proof once they recognize the pattern. When I finished, she stared out the restaurant window toward Main Street silently for several seconds. Then finally said, "They did the same thing to me." My stomach dropped instantly. Not identical fraud. Different version. Same structure. Mia explained slowly. When she left for Italy, Mom convinced her to postpone culinary school 1 year to help the restaurant. Then another year. Then another. By 23, she realized Corbin's kitchen wasn't asking for temporary sacrifice anymore. It expected permanent surrender. Interesting thing about toxic families. They confuse delaying your future with loving them properly. They kept saying the restaurant needed me, Maya whispered. Pause. But the truth? She smiled sadly afterward. They just didn't want me becoming someone they couldn't control anymore. That sentence followed me all week. Because deep down, I already knew it was true. Tuesday night. Dad knocked on my bedroom door for the first time in months. Actually knocked. Interesting, honestly. Because weak men become polite once consequences start approaching. He stood in the hallway holding 2 mugs of coffee. Gray sweatshirt. Tired eyes. Older than I remembered suddenly. I know you're upset, he said quietly. Upset. Interesting word for felony identity theft. He handed me the mug carefully. Then sat at the edge of the desk chair near the window. Long silence. Finally, we did what we had to do to keep the restaurant alive. There it was. Not denial. Just justification. Interesting thing about desperate people. They always believe necessity erases consent. You destroyed my credit. Dad rubbed both hands together slowly. We were going to fix it eventually. Eventually. The favorite word of people benefiting from your suffering. Then he said the sentence that permanently ended any chance of reconciliation emotionally. You weren't using your credit for anything important anyway. Interesting, honestly. Because my father still didn't fully understand he stole a future. Not just numbers. Italy. School. Freedom. My entire adult life delayed because my family needed one more unpaid sacrifice. I stared at him for a very long time afterward. Then finally asked the only question left. Did Mom know? Silence. Huge silence. And honestly? That answer hurt worse than the fraud itself. The anniversary party started at 5 o'clock sharp beneath gold balloons and fake nostalgia. Interesting thing about family businesses. They survive on image long after love disappears internally. Corbin's kitchen overflowed with people by sunset. Church families. City council members. Former waitresses. Local reporters. Every booth packed. Every table covered in white cloth and framed photographs pretending 40 years looked beautiful from every angle. Interesting, honestly. Because public history is usually edited by whoever controls the microphone. Mom wore a navy blue dress and pearls. Perfect small-town matriarch energy. Dad shook hands near the register like a politician running for re-election emotionally. Gwen floated between tables balancing wine glasses and compliments. And me? I worked the floor. Of course I did. Refilling coffee. Running appetizers. Smiling politely beside people congratulating my parents for building such a wonderful family legacy. Legacy. Interesting word considering half the business legally existed under my stolen identity. At 6:14. The Ridgemont Gazette photographer asked for a family picture beside the anniversary cake. 3 tiers. Gold frosting. Tiny sugar roses. Family only. Mom called cheerfully. Interesting honestly. Because manipulative people love family language most when witnesses are nearby. Everyone gathered beside the cake. Mom. Dad. Gwen. The kids. Then Mom looked toward me holding a tray of drinks. You can jump back to work afterward, she said lightly. Not cruelly. That would have exposed her. Just casually enough to remind everyone where I belonged in the hierarchy. Service. Always service. Interesting thing about humiliation. It hurts worst when disguised as normalcy. The photographer adjusted his lens. Closer together, everybody. Mom wrapped an arm around Gwen immediately. Dad rested his hands on Lily and Max's shoulders. And suddenly, I realized there wasn't a single photograph in this building where I looked like someone whose future mattered equally. That clarity felt strangely peaceful. Because once the illusion dies, fear usually dies with it. At 7:02, Dad tapped his fork against a glass for speeches. The room quieted instantly. Interesting thing about small towns. People love listening to successful families describe themselves publicly. Dad thanked customers first. Then employees. Then the sacrifices our family made to keep Corbin's kitchen alive. Sacrifices. Interesting word from a man who used my identity as collateral. Then he smiled toward me. And honestly? That was the exact second I knew he still believed I would protect him. Sonia especially, he said warmly. She gave up a lot for this place. The room applauded. Actual applause. Interesting honestly. Because people clap for exploitation constantly once it's framed as loyalty. Dad continued. Family means showing up when people need you. Pause. Not running away chasing selfish dreams. There it was. Italy. Publicly reduced to selfishness. The room shifted slightly afterward. Tiny murmurs. Curious glances. Mom stared at me carefully now. Waiting. Expecting silence again. Instead, I stood up slowly. Interesting thing about fear. It disappears the moment you finally realize the relationship was already broken long before the confrontation. I actually prepared something too, I said calmly. The room softened immediately. People smiling politely. Expecting gratitude. Nostalgia. Maybe a sentimental daughter speech. Nathan stepped through the front door at exactly 7:11. Dark coat. Leather briefcase. Interesting honestly. Because accountability always looks overdressed in small towns. Dad's face changed instantly when he saw him. Tiny shift. Huge consequence. Nathan walked directly beside me carrying a stack of folders thick enough to destroy the evening permanently. What's this? Mom asked too quickly. Interesting response. Not curiosity. Panic. I accepted the microphone from Dad carefully. Then looked around the restaurant slowly. Every table full. Every witness present. Perfect. My father mentioned sacrifice, I said quietly. Pause. So let's talk honestly about mine. Complete silence. Even the kitchen stopped moving. I opened the folder slowly. Loan documents first. Then tax records. Then the forged business ownership filings. Every page tabbed. Highlighted. Documented. Interesting thing about paperwork. It becomes terrifying once emotions stop protecting people from facts. For 6 years. My parents used my identity to take out fraudulent loans, underreport taxes, and attach business debt to my name without consent. Gasps immediately. Actual gasps. Mrs. Patterson covered her mouth near booth 9. The Gazette reporter lowered his camera slowly. Dad stood frozen beside the cake. Mom whispered. Sonia. Dangerous whisper. The kind people use right before losing control publicly. I kept going. 3 loans. $86,000. Forged signatures. Frozen bank accounts. And the reason I missed my flight to Italy. Pause. Was because my mother stole my passport. The room exploded softly afterward. Whispers everywhere now. Noisy disbelief spreading table to table like fire through dry grass. Interesting, honestly. Because small towns survive on reputation until evidence arrives physically. Dad grabbed the microphone suddenly. This is family business. Interesting phrase. Because abusers always demand privacy once witnesses appear. No, Nathan said calmly beside me. Pause. These are federal crimes. Silence crashed back into the room instantly. Federal. That word changed everything. Mom started crying immediately. Real tears. Not guilt. Exposure. You're humiliating us, she whispered. Interesting accusation. Because people who steal your future always act shocked when you stop protecting their image. Then came the moment that truly ended the family permanently. Gwen stood up slowly beside the dessert table. Eyes red already. You were really leaving? Interesting, honestly. Because after all the fraud, all the theft, my sister still thought the deepest betrayal was my independence. Yes, I answered. Pause. I was always leaving. That sentence landed harder than the legal documents somehow. Because deep down, everyone in that room already knew the truth. Corbin's kitchen didn't survive through family loyalty. It survived because one daughter kept surrendering pieces of her life to hold everyone else together. Until she stopped. Nathan handed Dad the FTC fraud packet afterward. Then the IRS filing confirmations. Then the identity theft report numbers. Every page making Dad visibly smaller emotionally. Interesting thing about consequences. They strip authority fast once paperwork replaces intimidation. Mom sat down beside the anniversary cake crying into folded napkins. Mascara streaking. Gold balloons floating overhead like decorations for somebody else's funeral emotionally. Nobody comforted her. That part mattered. Because silence finally switched sides. Mrs. Patterson stood first. Walked across the restaurant slowly. Then hugged me tightly in front of everyone. You deserved better than this, honey. Interesting, honestly. Because sometimes strangers become the first people to say what your family never will. One by one. Customers started leaving quietly afterward. Not dramatic. Just uncomfortable. Church couples grabbing coats. Former employees avoiding eye contact. The Gazette reporter speaking softly into his phone outside. 40 years of reputation collapsing table by table. And through all of it, I felt lighter. Not happy. Just free. At 9:03. I walked upstairs to my bedroom for the last time. 2 suitcases already packed beside the closet. Passport inside my coat pocket now. New bank account active. New flight booked. New future waiting. I carried the bags downstairs slowly. Mom looked up immediately from the booth beside the window. Eyes swollen. Sonia. Tiny voice now. Fragile voice. Please don't do this. Interesting thing about manipulative families. They always call boundaries cruelty once control stops working. I looked around Corbin's kitchen one final time. Yellow lights. Coffee stains. 40 years of sacrifice disguised as tradition. Then finally answered honestly. I'm not doing this to the family. Pause. You already did. Silence afterward felt enormous. Not tense. Final. I walked out into the cold Ohio night carrying both suitcases while spring rain tapped softly against the sidewalks. No one followed me. That part hurt too. But honestly? Not as much as staying would have. My flight left for Italy at 6:20 the next morning. And for the first time in my entire life, nobody in my family knew how to stop me anymore.